Hello classy people, this is Josh for the Top Hat Gamer, and this week I'm reviewing Submerged. Narrative-driven games that eschew combat in favour of exploration seem to be on the rise lately, but so many of them fail to utilise the interactive aspect of being a video game. Does Submerged succeed where so many other games fail? Let's take a look. Submerged is set in a post-apocalyptic city that has fallen victim to an extreme rise in sea level. The game follows a young woman exploring the ruined city in order to find supplies for her wounded brother. As the search for aid continues, we learn more about what happened to the world and the events that lead to the young boy's critical condition. Unfortunately, while the setting and background lore of Submerged are fascinating, the game's story doesn't really go anywhere. We're presented with a threat fairly early on, but nothing really eventuates from this. While the search for aid works well in motivating players to explore the ruined city, the plot of Submerged feels like only a small part of a much more engaging story. Luckily, through progression, the events leading up to the siblings' current predicament is revealed to us. I just wish we could have played some of it as well. Much of the narrative is presented through the use of indigenous-style paintings, which fits the tribal language spoken by the main character. Details like this help the setting of Submerged feel like a living, breathing world, making it far more inviting to explore. The sparse, thoughtful soundtrack evokes a feeling of wonder and discovery, while the constant howling wind makes clambering up the various ruined structures a lonely experience. Accompanying the atmosphere of discovery are colourful visuals that bring a very serene touch to the post-apocalypse. The overgrown foliage and graceful, brightly mutated sea life give the impression that nature is reclaiming the ruined city, making this one of the more pleasant post-apocalyptic settings I've seen in games. It's extremely lucky that the game's atmosphere and visuals are so inviting, because the gameplay comes up short. Submerged prides itself on its lack of combat gameplay, but forgets to implement any other kind of gameplay instead. The majority of the game is spent finding supplies for the main character's wounded brother, which involves scouting the city for supply crates and then sailing to ruined towers and climbing up to collect the crates. Scouting towers with your telescope to find supplies or points of interest is a neat way of discovering your next port of call, and sailing from tower to tower is fast and enjoyable despite its simplicity. Simplicity really sums up the gameplay of Submerged nicely. Clambering up towers is as basic as it can be. You can only jump and climb at certain points, and actually moving up structures uses the same input as basic movement. You may as well just be walking on a flat surface, it's that straightforward. Along with the simple controls and gameplay comes the inability to actually fail. It doesn't matter if you're scaling pipes, shimmying across ledges, or sailing the deep waters of the city. I don't believe there's any way you can actually fail. The lack of any kind of challenge underlines this game's biggest problem. Submerged lacks depth, funnily enough. All that it would have taken to keep the gameplay fun and engaging was to further explore the very basic platforming that's already on display. Instead of just climbing, make the player jump across pits, swing on bars, literally anything else could have made this more interesting. As it stands, Submerged is a pleasant walk through a very pretty post-apocalyptic setting. The game's atmosphere is easily its biggest draw, from the colourful visuals to the sparse, lonely sound design, and while it requires more interaction than other more disappointing narrative-driven experiences, its gameplay is far too basic to engage anyone in the long run. Speaking of the long run, the game only has a playtime of roughly 2 hours or so, depending on how much you explore. It's pretty disappointing. Submerged gets the Top Hat Gamer rating of mediocre. Aside from its excellent setting and atmosphere, Submerged doesn't have a huge amount going for it. The story we play feels like a fragment of a far more complete story, and the gameplay, while functional, isn't overly fun or engaging. Lastly, Submerged is woefully short. If you want a serene, unique environment to explore, then you can do a lot worse than Submerged, but as a game, you can almost certainly do better. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the review informative. If you missed last week's review on Everybody's Gone to the Rapture, click the annotation. Now if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go boat around for a bit just to soak in the atmosphere.